Greetings, Boogie fans! Michael here, and I read through every single Dex entry in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and compiled a list of all the ones that I thought were worthy of note, due to being disturbing, funny, crazy, weird, interesting, new info about old Pokemon, or whatever else. This is all of them. Meowscarada's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon uses the reflective fur lining its cape to camouflage the stem of its flower, creating the illusion that the flower is floating. I thought this was kind of fun and interesting because they definitely just could have had the flower be floating, but instead it's like, no, it's actually an illusion. Crocolore's Scarlet entry says, the combination of Crocolore's fire energy and overflowing vitality has caused an egg-shaped fireball to appear on the Pokemon's head. I am one of, I'm sure, many people who thought it was just wearing a sombrero, which I feel like it's still intended to kind of look like that, but the fact that it's an egg in a bird's nest is interesting. And I don't fully understand it, because I'm not sure what that has to do with crocodiles. Skeledirge's Scarlet entry says, the fiery bird changes shape when Skeledirge sings. Rumor has it that the bird was born when the fireball on Skeledirge's head gained a soul. So the egg hatches, and it now is just like another being that's part of Skeledirge. There's gotta be some lore that explains this, but right now it's so confusing. Quaxly's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon migrated to Paldea from distant lands long ago. The gel secreted by its feathers repels water and grime. When Quaxly was first announced, a lot of people said, oh, why make this? It's just like Ducklet. But this indicates that Quaxly came from elsewhere, so maybe it used to be Ducklet and evolved into Quaxly once it was in Paldea, because there's no Ducklet in Paldea. Quaxly's Violet entry says, its strong legs let it easily swim around even in fast-flowing rivers. It likes to keep things tidy and is prone to overthinking things. This isn't any crazy lore, it's just like, I knew I liked Quaxly, he's just like me. Tarountula's Scarlet entry says, the ball of threads wrapped around its body is elastic enough to deflect the scythes of Scyther, this Pokemon's natural enemy. I always find it interesting when a Dex entry mentions a new relationship between Pokemon that we didn't know about before. So the fact that Scyther attacks Tarountula, I just think that's fun. Well, not fun. It's bad for Tarountula. Or is it, because it deflects it? Before we move on to the next entry, quick favor to ask you, could you subscribe? That'd be great. Lots of fun Pokemon videos on the way. Hoppip's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon is blown across vast distances by the wind. It is unclear where the Hoppip of Paldea originally came from. Then its Violet entry says, outside of cold regions, Hoppip can be found practically everywhere. This is because the wind carries this species all over the world. At some point, I'd be interested to see where Hoppip originally came from. A theory that I have is that eventually we'll get a regional Hoppip that's in the region where it started from, and that form is original Hoppip, and all the pink ones that went all over the world just evolved to be lighter and carried on the wind. Skiploom's Scarlet entry says, Skiploom enthusiasts can apparently tell where a Skiploom was born by the scent drifting from the flower on the Pokemon's head. I just think this is kind of silly. Like, no, yes, this is definitely from Johto. And I would know, I'm a Skiploom enthusiast. Jumpluff's Scarlet entry says, Jumpluff travels on seasonal winds. Once its cotton spores run out, its journey ends, as does its life. Okay, this isn't like crazy, you know? If the fire goes out on a Charmander's tail, it dies. Once the spores run out on a Jumpluff, it dies. But like, maybe consider not having your Jumpluff use cotton spore, because it seems you might be expediting its demise. Fletchling's Violet entry says, Fletchling can be found in both rural and urban areas. They once had a huge territorial dispute with Squawkabilly. Fights broke out all over town. Another interesting relationship between a new Pokemon and an older one, and also I wish I could see that from a safe distance. Talonflame's Scarlet entry says it has top-notch flying capabilities. It flies around easily even while carrying prey that weighs more than 220 pounds. This stood out to me because why is it so oddly specific? Why 220 instead of a more round number like 200? I looked up some Pokemon that weigh around 220 pounds, and two that stood out were Venusaur and Tropius. Is Talonflame preying on Venusaur and Tropius, and then somehow carrying their enormous carcasses? Gumshoos's Violet entry says, Gumshoos specializes in relentlessly tracking down prey. The simple-minded Squovet doesn't seem to provide Gumshoos enough challenge. First off, random shade thrown towards Skwovet, but then also I just think it's funny that Gumshoos needs the challenge, you know? He's not fulfilled by preying on simple prey, you know? It's kind of like Nimona. Skwovet's Scarlet entry says it stores berries in its cheeks. When there are no berries to be found, Skwovet will stuff pebbles in its cheeks to stave off its cravings. This is cute and funny, but also kind of sad. Next, I want to talk about Vivillon. Vivillon has a bunch of different forms originally determined by the real-world region of the 3DS it was caught in. Scarlet and Violet add entries for all those different forms for the first time, but they all basically say the same thing, just swapping out the description of where it's from based on the form of Vivillon. But the entry that stands out to me is Vivillon's Fancy form, a form previously only obtainable through an event back in 2014 and no other time, but is now the only form you can get in Paldea. The Scarlet entry says the patterns on this Pokemon depend on the climate and topography of the land it was born in. This form is from a mysterious land. So not only were those fancy form Vivillons from that event almost a decade ago coming from Paldea, which makes you wonder if they had started any planning for Scarlet and Violet at that point in time, but also, why is the Dex calling it a mysterious land? We're standing in the middle of it. It's not that mysterious anymore. Corviknight's Scarlet entry says Corviknight cannot serve as a taxi service in Paldea because the Pokemon's natural predators will attack it while it flies, endangering the customer. First off, I think it's strange that this giant metal bird has any predators at all, but also we know what that predator is. We have to go out of order here in the Dex for a little bit, but that predator is Tinkaton. Its Scarlet entry says this intelligent Pokemon has a very daring disposition. It knocks rocks into the sky with its hammer, aiming for flying Corviknight. And then if you look closely, the color of Tinkaton's hammer, what does it remind you of? Tinkaton is striking Corviknight out of the sky and ripping the metal off its body to make its freaking hammer. This creature is an enemy of Team Sky! Speaking of Team Sky, the Team Sky merch at MandJTVmerch.com has sold out. Thank you guys so much for picking those up, but we do have some Mighty Base Form plushies left as we ordered more of these than the shirts. So if you want to pick one up, we're selling them till they sell out, MandJTVmerch.com. Paldean Wooper's Scarlet entry says, after losing a territorial struggle, Wooper began living on land. The Pokemon changed over time, developing a poisonous film to protect its body. I always love when they explain why the change in form occurred for a regional variant, so I think this is fun. But also I wonder, who was the territorial struggle with? Clodsire's Scarlet entry says, when attacked, this Pokemon will retaliate by sticking thick spines out from its body. It's a risky move that puts everything on the line. During my Scarlet playthrough, I read that Dex entry and then proceeded to immediately see those spines come out, which was quite shocking. Oh, whoa! The spines. I have since learned that Clodsire is based on the Iberian ribbed newt, which is a creature that will puncture its own skin with its rib bones to act as a defense mechanism, which means those Clodsire spikes might be its bones. Bounsweet's Violet entry says, a greedent drawn in by the sweet scent of these Pokemon will tuck the Bounsweet in among the berries in its tail and carry them all away. This is funny to me, but also I'm just like, that Bounsweet's gonna get dropped off once the greedent realizes it's not a berry, and then it's gonna be like, how do I get home? I barely have legs. Steeny's Scarlet entry says, Steenie spreads a sweet scent that makes others feel invigorated. This same scent is popular for antiperspirants. First off, I would wear some Steenie antiperspirant. It'd be really funny to just walk around and people smell me and they're like, oh my God, I feel so much better. And then Steeny's Violet entry says, Steenie bounces energetically through the forests. If the rind that peels off its body is pulverized, it can be used to treat stomach pains. I always think it's interesting when they talk about what part of a Pokemon can be used for like food or medicine, because in modern entries, they never say, oh, you just eat this Pokemon. It's like, oh, this part that falls off, you know, we just pick it up. And they're trying to ease off on the whole fact that they eat Pokemon thing. Zarina's Violet entry says, this Pokemon launches fierce yet elegant kicks with its long, slender legs. It views Quaquaval as its rival. Please, next season of the Pokemon anime, Zarina and Quaquaval dance battle step up style. Carcoal's Violet entry says, due to the coal tar created inside it, the heap of coal on Carcoal's back never falls apart, even when the Pokemon rolls around at high speeds. I'm glad they explained it, because I've definitely looked at Carcoal before and been like, most of it would just like go away if it got tipped over, but apparently no, it's all held together. Oricorio Bylay Style's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon is incredibly popular, possibly because its passionate dancing is a great match with the temperament of Paldean people. I like that they acknowledged the fact that the Bylay style, Bylay being Spanish for dance, is based on the flamenco dance, which is a dance that comes from Spain, and Paldea is based on the Iberian Peninsula. Petalil's Violet entry says, if the leaves on its head are pruned with regularity, this Pokemon can be grown into a fine, plump shape. I just thought that this was a little funny and weird. Like, yes, you can grow your Petalil to be fine and plump. It's silly. Flapple's Violet entry says it uses its own body fluid to repair its apple. Strong Flapple that have won many battles have apples that are clay colored all over. This is fascinating to me because it means that a Flapple that's older and been around for a while has had to repair its apple for a lot longer. And while it keeps the apple intact, the apple is getting older and thus changing color. And I really wish we could see that in the games. Squawkabilly has 4 different colors and different dex entries for each color. And it turns out these 4 different colors have differences beyond just their appearance. The green one's Violet entry says, green feathered flocks hold the most sway. When they're out searching for food in the mornings and evenings, it gets very noisy. The blue one's Violet entry says, blue-feathered Squawkabilly view their green-feathered counterparts as rivals, since the latter make up the largest, most powerful groups. The yellow one's Violet entry says, the yellow Squawkabilly are especially fierce. They've even been known to drive other bird Pokemon out of town. And then the white one's Violet entry says, though these Squawkabilly are the fewest in number, they have no trouble living in town since they blend in with the white buildings. So the green ones are the most common and have the most sway. The blue ones resent the green ones because of their larger numbers and influence. The yellow ones are jerks, and the white ones are the fewest in number, but are fine with just blending into buildings. Crabominable's Scarlet entry says, the detached pincers of these Pokemon are delicious. Some trainers bring Lechonk into the mountains just to search for them. Another instance of, oh hey, people eat some Pokemon parts, but it's the ones that have fallen off. But also, this is the first confirmation that Crabominable's pincers are delicious. We've known via previous generations that Crabrawlers are good, but now we know that Crabominables are too. Phanpy's Violet entry says, it is far stronger than it appears. If a Phanpy is swinging its trunk around and your arm gets hit by it, your arm bone will shatter. That is a little graphic and also terrifying. I like my arm bones being together, so keep your distance from the tiny deadly elephant. Donphan's Scarlet entry says, Donphan is covered in tough hide, so even being hit by a car won't faze this Pokemon. However, it is extremely susceptible to rain. This seems odd to me because I know it's a ground type and ground is weak to water, but like so many of Phanpy's dex entries talk about how it lives on riverbanks. So with just that evolution, Donphan becomes that weak to just rain? Copperage's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon was brought to Paldea long ago by people from a faraway land. It's so strong that it can easily pull an airplane. Now your first instinct is probably, oh, that faraway land, it's gotta be Galar, right? Well, probably not. That's because Copperage's Sword entry says they came over from another region long ago and worked together with humans. Their green skin is resistant to water. So while it's possible that Copperage arrived in Paldea from Galar, it could also be the other way around, or both of them came from elsewhere. And I wonder, where is this elsewhere? Is it a region based on India because Copperaja is inspired by Indian elephants? I don't know. I'd like to find out. Knacklestack's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon dry cures its prey by spraying salt over them. The curing process steals away the water in the prey's body. That is disturbing. I know. It's the animal kingdom. There is violence and murder everywhere. But also, is this fun little Minecraft frog draining the moisture of its prey while they're still alive? But then also it's in stark contrast to its evolution. Garganicle's Scarlet entry says, Garganicle will rub its fingertips together and sprinkle injured Pokemon with salt. Even severe wounds will promptly heal afterward. So with just one evolution, it goes from the salt violently draining the fluids from something to helping heal wounds. And that's just like, wow, this thing had therapy. Arrokuda's Scarlet entry says, Arrokuda can swim quickly, but only in a straight line. The ones that become sluggish from overeating are the first to be targeted by flocks of Wattrel. I thought Arrokuda might be in a better situation because there's no Cramorant in Paldea, but nope. Wattrel still eat it. Then its Violet entry says it takes down prey by charging into them with its hard, pointed jaw. But Arrokuda's eyesight is poor, so this tactic has a low success rate. Every time a Dex entry talks about, oh, this Pokemon attacks its prey by doing this, but actually it's kind of garbage at it. I just think that's funny. It's like, all right, throwing shade on these random Pokemon. Barrascuda's Scarlet entry says it spins its tail fins to leap from the water, then viciously bites down on Wingull flying close to the water's surface. That's a little horrifying, but also look what its Dex entry picture is. Yeah, that Wingull is moments from death. And then its Violet entry says it swims at speeds of over 100 knots and battles fiercely with pods of Finizen over prey. I just think it's interesting that Barrascuda and Finizen compete over prey. But also we just talked about how Barrascuda eats Wingull. Does that mean this adorable dolphin does too? Next up are Flabebe, Float, and Florges. And for the first time, we have different Dex entries for each color flower. All of Flabebe's just talk about basically which color flower it prefers, but Float and Florges have some more interesting details. For Float, it talks about how it uses the wavelengths of light that its flower emanates, and that's interesting. The red one's Violet entry says this Pokemon uses red wavelengths of light to pour its own energy into flowers and draw forth their latent potential. Then the blue one's Violet entry says it exchanges power with flowers via wavelengths of visible light. This form of Float can sync with the wavelength that produces the color blue. Who knew Float was so into wave physics? Then we also learned that the white flower variations of Float and Florges have powers beyond just their white flowers. White Flower Float's Scarlet entry says, Float that are fond of white flowers can also easily sync with flowers of other colors. Then White Flower Florges' Scarlet entry says, a flower garden made by a white flowered Florges will be beautifully decorated with flowering plants of many colors. Then its Violet entry says, a Florges adorned with white flowers can sync with the wavelengths of various colors to draw forth their power. This is both interesting and makes scientific sense, because white light is all colors of light all at the same time. And since they're using the wavelengths of light, it tracks that the white Float and Florges can utilize multiple colors all at the same time. But then in addition to this fun science stuff, some of Florges' Dex entries show me that it's way more violent than I thought it was. The orange one's Scarlet entry says, its orange flowers fire off powerful beams, attacking as if they were a battery of artillery. Then the blue one's Scarlet entry says, though usually compassionate, Florges will hunt down anyone who vandalizes its flower garden, showing no mercy even if they beg for their lives. Yeah, it's a little dark for this cute flower Pokemon. Oh, but also we learned one more interesting fact about Florges. The blue one's Violet entry says, blue pigments were tremendously expensive in the past, so paintings of blue Florges are highly valuable. And I just think that's interesting. It's really all I have to say over the whole no mercy even if they beg for their lives thing. Axew's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon lives in nests that are made in the ground. People in ancient times used its tusks as cooking knives. I think that's interesting. I love hearing about how people interacted with Pokemon in ancient times. Really hoping for another Legends game. Fracture's Violet entry says, Fracture uses its thick tusks to neatly cut prey into two portions, one to eat now and one to save for later. Little graphic, thinking about it slicing a carcass in half, but also we respect a Pokemon that eats its leftovers. Annihilape's Scarlet entry says, when its anger rose beyond a critical point, this Pokemon gained power that is unfettered by the limits of its physical body. This is hardcore and awesome because it's referencing a previous generation Dex entry for Primeape. Primeape's Sun entry says it has been known to become so angry that it dies as a result. Its face looks peaceful in death, however. Definitely a Dex entry I've discussed in previous videos, but now think about it. Some Primeape just get so angry and they just die. But then some, instead of dying, they release themselves from the bounds of their physical bodies and become an Annihilape. Like, a new evolution inspired by a Pokemon's previous generation dex entry. That's so creative and so cool. Cerulege's Scarlet entry says, the fiery blades on its arms burn fiercely with the lingering resentment of a sword wielder who fell before accomplishing their goal. Then its Violet entry says, an old set of armor steeped in grudges caused this Pokemon's evolution. Cerulege cuts its enemies to pieces without mercy. Yeah, it's just pretty dark. Just some dark stuff, as they tend to do with ghost-type Pokemon. Gumi's Violet entry says, Gumi's horns are excellent sensory organs that cover all 5 of Gumi's senses. Gumi picks up on danger from the movement of the air. We've known that Gumi's horns are sensory organs for a while, but what sticks out to me is that it's all 5 senses, which is just like, I just picture it like its horn accidentally touching like a tree branch and being like, oh, that's pretty woody. Goodra's Violet entry says, this Pokemon is uncontrollable when enraged. It rampages on, lashing its tail with enough power to send a dump truck flying. I thought it was strange that Goodra got this dex entry because most of its dex entries talk about how it loves its trainer and gives it slimy hugs. But this one is like, when it becomes enraged, it's really destructive, which is something they usually use to describe other pseudo-legendary Pokemon, like Salamence. Watchroll's Violet entry says, these Pokemon make their nests on coastal cliffs. The nests have a strange crackling texture, and they're a popular delicacy. Question, why are people eating nests? Is this something people do in real life? I don't know, but to me it seems like that aren't nests usually made of twigs or like straw? Like, why would you want to eat that? Especially one that's crackling with electricity. Deerling is yet another Pokemon that's gotten different dex entries for its different forms for the first time. And 4 of those dex entries let us know that each different form has a different smell. The spring form smells delicate, sweet, and calming. The summer has a distinct grassy smell. The autumn one smell is softly sweet, and the winter one has hardly any scent at all. But then in addition to that, we've also learned that Deerling can be pests. The spring form's Violet entry says, despite Deerling's adorable appearance, farmers consider it a nuisance since it loves plant shoots and will eat them all up. Then the summer form's Scarlet entry says, to prevent Deerling from entering their fields, many farmers will have several lichen rocks stand guard, as they are the natural enemy of Deerling. First off, I think it's fascinating that this very cute thing is actually a pest, but also Lycanroc, natural enemy of Deerling? I think Lycanroc just eat it. How is that natural enemy? It's a predator-prey relationship here. I also think it's funny that farmers are using wolves to defend their farms, when in most of human history, farmers would have to defend their farms from wolves. There are a couple other fun facts about Deerling we learn as well. The autumn form's Scarlet entry says, these Pokemon are not shy. They will behave as they please, even in front of people. If you feed one of them, it will quickly take a liking to you. Then the winter form's Violet entry says, this Pokemon will playfully headbutt those it gets along well with. It has antlers hidden under its flower, so the headbutts are a little painful. So we learn the autumn form is very brazen and is very loyal if you feed it, and the winter form actually has antlers hidden under its flower, which is fascinating because I don't think we've ever seen those before. And then, like Deerling, Sawsbuck also gets different entries for all its different forms for the first time. And half of those 8 dex entries discuss how there are many Sawsbuck enthusiasts, just like Skiploom enthusiasts, which weird, but also those enthusiasts prefer different things about different Sawsbuck forms that indicate more beauty for a specific Sawsbuck. They like paler flowers on the spring form, thicker and larger branches on the summer form, darker red foliage on the autumn form, but then the winter form gets cast aside. Its Violet entry says, though there are many enthusiasts for Sawsbuck as a species, this seasonal form in particular is not very popular. How dare you? You call yourselves Sawsbuck enthusiasts? Then look over what is probably the coolest form with its beautiful and majestic chest fur and foot fur and bright white antlers? Nay, how dare you defame this Sawsbuck? This is a winter Sawsbuck fan club from here on out. Anybody who doesn't like it can get out! But aside from the Sawsbuck enthusiast lore, we learn a lot of other interesting facts about all the different forms. The spring form Scarlet entry says, it seems that a sawsbuck with many flowers on its antlers will grow at a slightly slower pace because the flowers absorb the Pokemon's nutrients. Interesting how more flowers indicates a potentially less healthy sawsbuck. The summer form's Violet entry says, this Pokemon's leaves can be made into a black tea, the taste of which varies depending on the region of origin. Paldea's is especially aromatic. I would like to try sawsbuck leaf tea. I wonder if it would be black or green. Or chamomile? I don't know how tea works. The autumn form's Violet entry says, sawsbuck in their autumn form are known for having very short tempers. The males fight each other incessantly. This tracks with the dex entry I mentioned earlier for Deerling's autumn form, how they behave as they please and don't really care if people are watching. So they go from being kind of a, I'll do what I want, I don't care, to just being really angry and aggressive. But then, the winter form's Scarlet entry says, it's said that sawsbuck are calm and easy to tame during the season when they take on this form. So it's the perfect time to make one your partner. So it seems that sawsbuck get really irritable and aggressive when their leaves are starting to fall off. But then, the winter happens, they lose all their leaves, and they're like, you know what, this is fine, I'm chill now. Or it's seasonal depression. Farigiraf's Scarlet entry says, now that the brainwaves from the head and tail are synced up, the psychic power of this Pokemon is 10 times stronger than Girafarig's. This is funny, because no, it's not. Girafarig's base special attack is 90, and Farigiraf's is 110. That is very far away from being 10 times. But also, they definitely could not actually multiply it by 10. Like, could you imagine if Farigiraf had 900 base special attack? There's nothing that even has that much as a total. Maschiff's Scarlet entry says, it always scowls in an attempt to make opponents take it seriously, but even crying children will burst into laughter when they see Maschiff's face. This is adorable and very funny. Pachirisu's Scarlet entry says, it's one of the kinds of Pokemon with electric cheek pouches. It shoots charges from its tail. To my knowledge, this is the first time that a dex entry is acknowledging that Pika clones are just like a class of Pokemon. I could be wrong, but to me it's like, oh, it's one of the kinds of Pokemon with electric cheek pouches. You could just say it's one of the Pika clones. Stantler's Violet entry says, it's said that this Pokemon used to be stronger long ago when it had many enemies, and that it was even able to evolve under its own power. This is talking about weird here, and I think it's cool that the Dex is acknowledging this. It's the only instance in the Paldea Pokedex that I could find, and I think it's cool that they're doing it. Fungus's Scarlet entry says, there's a theory that the developer of the modern day Pokeball really liked Fungus, but this has not been confirmed. All of Fungus's previous Dex entries are basically like, no one knows why. It looks like a Pokeball, which I've thought is just lazy design. You know, there should be a reason that this organic creature looks like a man-made device. However, this is a theory that kind of explains it. If Fungus was around first and the modern Pokeball designer copied it, then that actually makes sense. Amungus's Scarlet entry says, be wary of the poisonous spores it releases. Mushrooms resembling Amungus's caps will grow out of anywhere the spores touch. First off, I think it's fun that it can grow more Pokeball mushrooms, but also they'll grow out of anywhere the spores touch. Like maybe your skin? Ursaring's Scarlet entry says, it usually wears a hardened expression, but when it's licking up honey, which it loves, the joy it feels will cause it to break into a wide grin, which is just adorable. Then its Violet entry says, it's quite skilled at climbing trees. If it comes across a Primeape while searching for berries in the treetops, trouble will surely ensue. Another conflict between wild Pokemon that's fun to learn about. Although I feel like Primeape definitely has the advantage, considering the whole fighting versus normal thing. Gogoat's Scarlet entry says, it can sense the feelings of others by touching them with its horns. This species has assisted people with their work since 5,000 years ago. That's really cool. And it's also about how long it's been since Gogoat was in a game, you know? So he's back. Gogoat is back! Blazebreed Tauros' Scarlet entry says, when heated by fire energy, its horns can get hotter than 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. Those gored by them will suffer both wounds and burns. That's, you know, but also, I think it would cauterize the wounds it creates. So I feel like it would be like, you know, it'd be really bad, but also, I I feel like you're not gonna bleed out. Aqua Breed Tauros' Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon blasts waters from holes on the tip of its horns. The high pressure jets pierce right through Tauros' enemies. Water jets have been used to cut things for a long time, but it's kind of disturbing to think about it happening to me. Then its Violet entry says, it swims by jetting water from its horns. The most notable characteristic of the Aqua Breed is its high body fat, which allows it to float easily, which is fun, and a lot cuter than the last entry. Litleo's Scarlet entry says, when Litleo are young, female Pyroar will teach them how to hunt. Once the Litleo mature, they will leave the pride and set out on their own. Then Pyroar's Scarlet entry says, the females of a pride work together to bring down prey. It's thanks to them that their pride doesn't starve. These are the first Dex entries that discuss Litleo and Pyroar having the same pride behavior as real life lions. So that's cool. Gothorita's Violet entry says, using its psychic power, it arranges pebbles to form the shapes of constellations. Some people believe this Pokemon came from outer space. This is the first mention of Gothorita being a Pokemon people think came from space, so it's joining the ranks of LGM and Clefairy and whatever else. Gothitel's Scarlet entry says, Gothitelle unleashes psychic energy and shows opponents dreams of the universe's end. These dreams are apparently ethereal and beautiful. Then its Violet entry says, it gazes at the stars to predict the future. It acts somewhat detached because it has seen the end of all existence. We're getting kind of existential here, and also it's crazy that this thing can see many, many billions of years into the future, or trillions. When is the predicted heat death of the universe? The heat death will occur in 1.7 times 10 to the 106th power years. That's a long way to see into the future. It's ethereal and beautiful, though. It'll just be heat death. It'll just be everything going to nothing. Anyways, Mimikyu's Violet entry says, Mimikyu was only recently identified as a Pokemon. Previously, people thought it was just a ghost wearing a cloth. I think this is silly because we very much established that ghosts are Pokemon. Doesn't matter if you're a ghost of a person, you end up in some kind of object and boom, you're a Pokemon now. Bramblin's Scarlet entry says, a soul unable to move on to the afterlife was blown around by the wind until it got tangled up with dried grass and became a Pokemon. What did I just say? What did I just say? Ghosts becoming Pokemon. It's a whole type for a reason. Bramblegast's Scarlet entry says, it will open the branches of its head to envelop its prey. Once it absorbs all the life energy it needs, it expels the prey and discards it. There seem to be a lot of Pokemon that do this, that just absorb the life energy of something and then discard what's left. And I just think that's disturbing every time I read it. Then its Violet entry says, Bramblegast wanders around arid regions. On rare occasions, mass outbreaks of these Pokemon will bury an entire town. This is interesting because it can actually happen. There are news stories out there of entire towns getting just buried in tumbleweeds. So I think it's cool that they mentioned that as a nod to something that can happen in real life. Toadschool's Scarlet entry says, Toadschool lives in muggy forests. The flaps that fall from its body are chewy and very delicious. Yet another Dex entry talking about a thing that falls off a Pokemon being edible and tasty. Then its Violet entry says, though it looks like Tentacool, Toadschool is a completely different species. Its legs may be thin, but it can run at speeds of 30 miles an hour. The first part is demonstrating that it's a convergent evolution with Tentacool, which we've known about since Wiglet was announced. It's cool, it's interesting, it's fun. But also, you expect me to believe that this thing with tiny little things for legs can run 30 miles an hour? The fastest a person has ever run is 27.5 miles an hour. Why can this little mushroom go faster than us? Toadsquirrel's Violet entry says, it coils its 10 tentacles around prey and sucks out their nutrients, causing the prey pain. The folds along the rim of its head are a popular delicacy. This creature destroys its prey by sucking its life energy, and we're gonna go out of the way to specify that it causes agony in its victim. But also, you know, part of its head tastes good. Fomantis's Violet entry says, many trainers give their Fomantis their own flower pots so they can sunbathe in peace and quiet. This is very cute. Lurantis' Scarlet entry says, by masquerading as a bug Pokemon, it lowers the guard of actual bug Pokemon lured in by a scent of sweet flowers. Its sickles bring them down. This sort of contradicts a previous Dex entry. Its Ultra Sun entry says, for self-protection, it pretends to be a bug Pokemon. So it seems like the Lurantis in Alola maybe use their disguise more self-defense, but the ones in Paldea use it more as a hunting technique. Cloth's Scarlet entry says, Cloth hangs upside down from cliffs waiting for prey, but Cloth can't remain in this position for long because its blood rushes to its head. Yet another one of a Pokemon using a hunting technique and not being that great at it. Capsaikid's Violet entry says, traditional Paldean dishes can be extremely spicy because they include the shed front teeth of Capsaikid among their ingredients. Another discarded Pokemon part being used in food, but also the teeth? The teeth? You could have done like the leaves on its head. Why the teeth? Scovillain's Scarlet entry says, the red head converts spicy chemicals into fire energy and blasts the surrounding area with a super spicy stream of flame. Then its Violet entry says, the green head has turned vicious due to the spicy chemicals stimulating its brain. Once it goes on a rampage, there's no stopping it. This isn't extremely explicit, but since the two entries talk about different heads and only one discusses fire, to me it seems like the red head is the one breathing fire and the green head is using the grass attacks, I think. Relord's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon creates a mud ball by mixing sand and dirt with psychic energy. It treasures its mud ball more than its own life. To me, it seems like this Pokemon just has poor judgment. And then we go to its evolution, Rabsca, and its two dex entries seem to contradict each other. Its Scarlet entry says, the body that supports the ball barely moves, therefore, it is thought that the true body of this Pokemon is actually inside the ball. But then in Violet, an infant sleeps inside the ball. Rabsca rolls the ball soothingly with its legs to ensure the infant sleeps comfortably. So what is going on here? Is the true body of the Pokemon in the ball? Or is the true body the bug and there's a baby it's trying to raise in the ball? Or is the body dead? Does Relor die when it evolves? Or does it like die and give birth? What is happening here? Espathra's Violet entry says, it emits psychic power from the gaps between its multicolored frills and sprints at speeds of greater than 120 miles an hour. That is very freaking fast. And also, just a data point to potentially create a formula for what is a base speed stat to a real speed. Espathra's is 105, which is pretty fast. So I guess the base speed to mile an hour is add 15, multiply by like a percentage. I don't know, that's a preposterous speed for the Lady Gaga ostrich. Mudsdale's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon has been treasured not just for its physical labor, but also because it produces high quality mud used for making pottery. I thought this was interesting. Previous entries have said how its mud is used to coat the sides of houses to help protect them from the elements. And I also think it's fun that people in Paldea use it to make pottery. Larvesta's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon was called the larva that stole the sun. The fire Larvesta spouts from its horns can cut right through a sheet of iron. This confuses me because previous entries talk about how people said it was, oh, it's the larva born from the sun, not the one that stole the sun? Or are they saying it stole the sun because it looks like the sun is in its body? It's just kind of confusing. Then its Violet entry says, in ancient times, Larvesta was worshipped as the emissary of the sun. However, it was also viewed as a burden since it often caused forest fires. Some people worshipped it, some people didn't like it. That's the exact same thing that happens with Volcarona. Its Scarlet entry says its burning body causes it to be unpopular in hot parts of the world, but in cold ones, Volcarona is revered as an embodiment of the sun. Volcarona also caused problems when it would scatter its flaming scales. However, it's not causing the problems you would think. Its Violet entry says this Pokemon scatters burning scales. Most of the danger of these scales is not in the heat, it's in the way they rob the surrounding air of oxygen. Volcarona isn't just burning things down, it's suffocating people. It is insane how this Pokemon is either freaking awful or is saving lives after volcanic eruption. Like, it is on both ends of the good-bad spectrum. Tinkatuff's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon will attack groups of Poniard and Bisharp, gathering metal from them in order to create a large and sturdy hammer. Like with Tinkaton discussed earlier in this video, this line just likes to kill steel types so it can make tools, which is kinda morbid for the cute pink gingerbread people. Morgrum's Scarlet entry says, Morgrum prefers dirty tactics, like ambushing, because it doesn't have confidence in its brawn. I just think it's funny that Morgrum is aware that it's little skinny. Grimmsnarl's Violet entry says, it lives deep within the forest. Even after evolving into this splendid form, it hasn't given up on its petty misdeeds and pranks. What stands out to me in this Dex entry, the fact that it is referred to as a splendid form. Whoever wrote this, probably Jacques, thinks Grimmsnarl is splendid. And that's really funny. Maybe it's because they have the same color hair? Wiglet's Violet entry says, though it looks like Diglett, Wiglet is an entirely different species. The resemblance seems to be a coincidental result of environmental adaptation. We've known about this since Wiglet was announced, but I wanted to mention it for those of you who missed it. Wiglet, along with Toadstool, are not variants of Diglett and Tentacool. They are convergent evolutions, completely unrelated species who happen to evolve into similar environmental niches. Halucha's Violet entry says, Halucha live quietly without flocking together. They fight constantly with their natural enemies, noisy groups of Primeape. So both Ursaring and Halucha don't get along with Primeape. Noibat's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon emits ultrasonic waves from its large ears to search for fruit to eat. It mistakes Applin for its food, which I feel like is an understandable mistake. Noivern's Violet entry says, in the dark, even Hydreigon are terrified of this Pokemon, but in the light, Noivern is the one that avoids battle. It's so strange to think about Hydreigon being scared of anything, but if you think about a Noivern being the one that can see you, but you can't see it, I get it. Dreepy's Scarlet entry says, in the evening, groups of Dreepy will fly at high speeds over the ocean and poke at Pokemon in the water for fun. So I guess Dreepy are kind of mischievous little jerks. Then its Violet entry says it has a habit of biting at Clauncher even though it doesn't feed on them. This is said to be vestigial behavior from when Dreepy was alive. Dreepy is dead, if that wasn't clear. If you're confused by when Dreepy was alive, that's explained in its Sword Dex entry. After being reborn as a ghost Pokemon, Dreepy wanders the areas it used to inhabit back when it was alive in prehistoric seas. So basically what these Dex entries are saying together is that in prehistoric times when Dreepy wasn't a ghost, maybe it was a dragon water type, it fed on Clauncher or something similar. And its memories from that time are still there, so it repeats that habit even though it doesn't eat Clauncher anymore. Dracloak's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon flies around at over 120 miles an hour. If a Dracloak is defeated in a battle, its Dreepy will wander off without a second thought. Once again, Dreepy seem to be jerks. Dragapult's Scarlet entry says, Dragapult can make its whole body transparent by clearing its mind and focusing. Even the Dreepy and Dragapult's horns become invisible. That's just objectively cool. It can turn invisible, along with the Dreepy. I just think that's awesome. Glamora's Violet entry says, Glamora's petals are made of crystallized poison energy. It has recently become evident that these petals resemble Terra Jewels. The only place you can find Glamora in the wild is deep within Area Zero, where the Terra crystals are. So clearly this Pokemon was born from there somehow. Wash Rotom's Violet entry says, the model of washing machine that Rotom can inspirit has been discontinued, so these appliances are now traded at high prices. This is silly to me. Why can Rotom only inhabit a certain model of washing machine? It can inhabit all kinds of different appliances. You would think it could inhabit a different type of washing machine. Fan Rotom's Violet entry says, there are several appliances that Rotom can inspirit, but the first one to be developed was the electric fan. I did a bit of Googling about all the other appliances. When was the first time an electric version of this appliance was invented? And the first one was indeed the electric fan in 1886. Greavard's Scarlet entry says, it is said that a dog Pokemon that died in the wild without ever interacting with a human was reborn as this Pokemon. That's just kind of sad. But also, what do you expect? It's a ghost type Pokemon. They're all sad or evil. Houndstone's Violet entry says, a lovingly mourned Pokemon was reborn as Houndstone. It doesn't like anyone touching the protuberance atop its head. This one is kind of nicer, you know? A beloved family pet passed away, and then it came back as a zombie, but it's a friendly one. Orangaru's Scarlet entry says, people used to mistake Orangaru for a human when they saw it issue command after command to the other Pokemon of the forest. To me, I can only really understand this if you saw it from the back, really far away. Because if you saw it from the front, it's very clearly a monkey. Passimian's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon battles by throwing hard berries. It won't obey a trainer who throws Pokeballs without skill, which means Nemona can never use a Passimian. On the Scarlet website, it mentions how she's not very good at throwing Pokeballs. It's why she wears that Steph Curry shooting sleeve. Stonejourner's Scarlet entry says, the elemental composition of the rocks that form its body were found to match the bedrock of a land far away from this Pokemon's habitat. This is a reference to Stonejourner's inspiration, Stonehenge. The rocks at Stonehenge are not rocks that are found in that local area. Sandygas Scarlet entry says, if it loses its shovel, it will stick something else, like a branch, in its head to make do until it finds another shovel. Then its Violet entry says, it flings sand into the eyes of its prey and tries to close in on them while they're blinded. But since Sandygast is so slow, the prey tends to escape. Both of these Dex entries amuse me because they're kind of lighthearted, silly, cute things about a Pokemon whose previous Dex entries can get kind of dark. Palisand did not get the same treatment. Its Violet entry says, from the hollows in its arms, it fires the bones of its victims, which are all dried up after being drained of their vitality. Previous entries have discussed how Palisand drains the life energy of Pokemon, ends up with bones under it, really dark, really gross. But this takes it a step further. It then uses those bones as bullets? Like, could you imagine seeing this sandcastle sending out into battle for a friendly gym battle, and then it starts shooting bones? Anyways, on a lighter topic, let's talk about Shellos and global warming. West Shellos' Violet entry says, it oozes a purple fluid to deter enemies. Apparently, there are more West Sea Shellos now than there were in the past. Then, the East Shellos' Scarlet entry says, a recently published research paper states that this form of Shellos is gradually decreasing in number. The increase in West Shellos and decrease in East seems to be due to global warming. West Shellos' Sword entry says this Pokemon's habitat shapes its physique. According to some theories, life in warm ocean waters causes this variation to develop. Then the East form's Shield entry says its appearance changes depending on the environment. One theory suggests that living in cold seas causes Shellos to take on this form. Ocean waters are heating up, which means more of the warm water West Shellos and less of the cold water East Shellos. And it's kind of sad. But then we get to Gastrodon and it completely flips things? West Gastrodon's Scarlet entry says its whole body is sticky with mucus. In the past, this form of Gastrodon was by far the more numerous one. Then East Gastrodon's Violet entry says, fishers say that they did not see many of these Pokemon in the past, but this form of Gastrodon is now increasing in number. What is going on? You've got West Shellos going up in number, but West Gastrodon going down. And then East Shellos going down in number, but East Gastrodon going up. What is going on here? This is a biological and ecological mystery that I must know the answer to. Or they just made a typo and flipped them in the Dex entries by accident. I do have one more Gastrodon Dex entry to mention though. The West Form's Violet entry said, it appears on beaches where the waters are shallow. Once it catches prey, it will slowly melt them with its mucus before slurping them up. Just wanted to mention this because it's gross and disturbing. Skrelp's Violet entry says, this Pokemon is a poor swimmer. If it's caught in a fierce storm, it will sometimes get washed far away and become unable to return to its home, which is just kind of sad. Dragalge's Violet entry says, since Finizen is the better swimmer, Dragalge will approach it under the cover of seaweed, then immobilize it with a poisonous attack. So Dragalge preys on Finizen. Although it makes me wonder, since Finizen and Barraskewda compete for prey, does Dragalge prey on Barraskewda too? Clauncher's Violet entry says, Clauncher's claws will regrow if they fall off. Meat inside the claws is edible, but it has a distinct flavor that doesn't appeal to all tastes. This is a contradiction with previous Dex entries. Not the fact that it's edible, but about how it tastes. Its Ultrasun entry says its claws occasionally fall off and it keeps a low profile until they grow back. The meat of its claws is so delicious. Then in Sword, Clauncher's claws can fall off during battle, but they'll regenerate. The meat inside the claws is popular as a delicacy in Galar. So this means one of two things. One, the Clauncher and Paldea just don't taste as good to the general population, or two, Jacques just doesn't like Clauncher claws, and he's inserting his personal bias into this Pokedex. Marini's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon wanders the seaside looking for food. It often gets electric shocks from broken Pincurchin spines that it tries to eat. This is just kind of funny. Toxapex's Violet entry says, Toxapex gets into fierce battles with Bruxish over areas where warm ocean currents flow, but the odds are always against it. Another natural enemies Dex entry here, but also the results of the battles tend to make sense. Bruxish, Psychic type. Toxapex, Poison type. Bruxish, clear type advantage here. Flamigo's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon apparently ties the base of its neck into a knot so that the energy stored in its belly does not escape from its beak. Okay. How does it eat? If energy can't get out, how the heck is food supposed to get in? Cubchoo's Scarlet entry says, many of this species can be found along the shorelines of cold regions. If a Cubchoo lacks dangling snot, there's a chance it is sick. A chance it's sick? Previous Dex entries talk about how the snot is a barometer for its health. If it's watery and runny, then it's not doing well. If it's not there at all, something is very wrong. Beartic's Violet entry says, feared as the Snow White demon in northern lands, Beartic uses its frosty claws and fangs to attack prey. Just thought it was interesting, it had a specific nickname. This is the first we're hearing of it, called the Snow White demon. I feel like they could have named something different because it just makes me think of the princess. Cryogonal's Scarlet entry says, Cryogonal appear during cold seasons. It is said that people in Pokemon who die on snowy mountains are reborn into these Pokemon. I am calling BS. People are just saying that, but it's not a ghost type. If it was a ghost type, I'd believe it in a heartbeat, but this is just a pure ice type. You're just telling stories to scare kids into staying home when there's a blizzard. Satottle's Scarlet entry says, this species left the ocean and began living on land a very long time ago. It seems to be closely related to Whalmer. I think Satottle and Satitan are interesting because whales started on land. They were kind of like almost wolf-like looking things, and then they evolved to go back into the ocean. Whereas Satottle and Satitan were in the ocean alongside Whalmer and then left. Opposite what the other whales did. Bergmite's Violet entry says, Bergmite protects itself by coating its body in ice formed by frigid air of minus 140 degrees Fahrenheit. It fights with Frigibacks whenever they meet. So Bergmite can be a little feisty, especially with Frigibacks. But then it evolves and it mellows out. Avalug's Scarlet entry says, as Avalug walks along with Bergmite on its back, it comes across pods of Satitan. It lets them pass to avoid conflict. Avalug learned that violence is not always the answer. And also I think it's cute. They call groups of Satitan pods, like groups of whales in the ocean. Bisharp's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon commands a group of several Pawniard. Groups that are defeated in territorial disputes are absorbed by the winning side. So that's how King Gambit happened. They win a lot of battles against rival Bisharp, absorb them, and then end up being the ruler of Bisharp and Pawniard, and that creates the evolution into King Gambit. However, turns out King Gambit may not be as good of a tactician as one might think. In fact, it's definitely not. King Gambit's Violet entry says, though it commands a massive army in battle, it's not skilled at devising complex strategies. It just uses brute strength to keep pushing. That is not always the best strategy, King Gambit. Think you should probably read some Sun Tzu Art of War, because what you're doing is not gonna work. Hydreigon's Violet entry says, it's said that Hydreigon grew ferocious because people in times long past loathed it, considering it to be evil incarnate and attacking it relentlessly. This one's like actually really sad. Like Hydreigon wasn't always this vicious monster. It was driven to this by the cruelty of humanity. I don't like that. Veluza's Scarlet entry says, when Veluza discards unnecessary flesh, its mind becomes honed and its psychic power increases. The spare flesh has a mild but delicious flavor. I just think the whole design basis of Veluza is a little weird. Like it just like sheds its flesh on a regular basis. I wouldn't recommend that. Next up are Dondozo and Tatsugiri, and their dex entries further explain the relationship between them and why the commander ability happens in battle. Dondozo's Scarlet entry says, this Pokemon is a glutton, but it's bad at getting food. It teams up with a Tatsugiri to catch prey. Then its Violet entry says it treats Tatsugiri like its boss and follows it loyally. Though powerful, Dondozo is apparently not very smart. So in short, Dondozo has the brawn, while Tatsugiri is the brains. Tatsugiri's droopy form's Scarlet entry says, this species' differing colors and patterns are apparently the result of Tatsugiri changing itself to suit the preferences of the prey it lures in. So not only is Tatsugiri the commanding tactician, but it's also the bait. The stretchy form's Scarlet entry says, bird Pokemon are its main prey. This Pokemon knows it's weak, so it hunts with a partner. The fact that it preys on bird Pokemon, I guess makes sense, because it's acting like oh, I'm a discarded fish. And then the bird Pokemon come down to get it, and then Dondozo is like, oh, hello. Finally, the Stretchy Forms Violet entry says it's one of the most intelligent dragon Pokemon. It camouflages itself by inflating its throat sac. So it's very intelligent, which makes sense. It's the tactician and the commander in the Dondozo-Tatsugiri relationship, but also it inflates its throat sac, which makes it look like nigiri over rice. And that's its camouflage? Next is a batch of Paradox Pokemon, and their dex entries need to be taken with a grain of salt. The Paradox Pokemon's dex entries in their own games are basically all just like, this appears to be the Pokemon described in the Scarlet book or the Violet book, because then you can read the book and get information about it, supposedly. So then in the other version, that's where the dex entries have the information. But they all talk about information about these Pokemon from the Occulture magazine, which gives very heavy National Enquirer vibes. So the information is basically all speculation. However, I'm still going to make fun of this information because it shouldn't have been included in the Pokedex, the lexicon of hardcore Pokemon data and knowledge, not speculation from Occulture magazine. In short, this information is almost certainly not accurate, but I'm still going to make fun of it because it was put in the dex. Screamtail's Violet entry says it resembles a mysterious Pokemon described in a paranormal magazine as a Jigglypuff from 1 billion years ago. 1 billion years ago? A billion? No. Do you know what life was on Earth a billion years ago? Single-cell organisms. Not big Jigglypuff that look just like the ones we have today. Multicellular organisms didn't even show up until like 600 million years ago. No, a billion years ago is preposterous. Screamtail has gotta be way more recent. Brute Bonnet's Violet entry says it bears a slight resemblance to a Pokemon described in a dubious magazine as a cross between a dinosaur and a mushroom. It's not a cross between a dinosaur and a mushroom. It's just a more aggressive and meaner mushroom. Fluttermane's Violet entry says it has similar features to a ghostly pterosaur that was covered in a paranormal magazine, but the two have little else in common. Not a pterosaur, not a flying reptile. It flies, you know, and it's got some wings that like, I guess kind of look like that, but it's not any sort of related to like a pterodactyl. Sandy Shock's Violet entry says it slightly resembles a magneton that lived for 10,000 years and was featured in an article in a paranormal magazine. A magneton that lived for 10,000 years? Like, how would you know how long this thing lived? Are you just assuming like it's been alive for 10,000 years? Because it hasn't. It was brought here from a time machine. Iron Tread's Scarlet entry says this Pokemon closely resembles a scientific weapon that a paranormal magazine claimed was sent to this planet by aliens. Okay, all right, aliens? No. I mean, I guess maybe. Some Pokemon came from space. So I guess it's not outside of the realm of possibility, but we have no reason to believe why this wheel Dawn fan came from outer space. Iron Bundle's Scarlet entry says its shape is similar to a robot featured in a paranormal magazine article. The robot was said to have been created by an ancient civilization. Ancient compared to who? Compared to us? No. No ancient society had the technology to make an entirely robotic bird. Ancient compared to the future? Like we make it in 100 years and this is from like 1,000 years in the future? That I would get. Iron Hand's Scarlet entry says it is very similar to a cyborg covered exclusively by a paranormal magazine. The cyborg was said to be the modified form of a certain athlete. It's unclear here whether the Hariyama was an athlete and then got modified, or if it was like a person athlete and then got modified and that turned it into a Pokemon. What is, that can't be true. It's not a ghost type. Iron Jugulus's Scarlet entry says it resembles a certain Pokemon introduced in a paranormal magazine, described as the offspring of a Hydreigon that fell in love with a robot. This is funny, but it's definitely complete nonsense. That's not how reproduction works. Iron Moth's Scarlet entry says this Pokemon resembles an unknown object described in a paranormal magazine as a UFO sent to observe humanity. Why would a UFO from space look just like our Volcarona? No, it's clear someone just built a robot that looks like Volcarona. Iron Thorn's Scarlet entry says it has some similarities to a Pokemon introduced in a dubious magazine as a Tyranitar from 1 billion years into the future. Again, with the stupid usage of billion. Do you know what the difference is between 1,000,000 years and 1 billion years? It's about 1 billion years. There's not gonna be robots in 1 billion years. We're all gonna be dead, probably. Dinosaurs didn't last for 1 billion years. The last 2 Paradox Pokemon don't come immediately after in the deck, so we'll get to those in a bit. Chest form Gimmighoul Scarlet entry says this Pokemon was born inside a treasure chest about 1500 years ago. It sucks the life force out of scoundrels who try to steal the treasure. 1, Gimmighoul is 1500 years old, which is very old for a Pokemon. And number 2, it's a ghost type, it sucks the life force, you know what they do. Then roaming form Gimmighoul's Violet entry, which is not currently available in the game, it wanders around carrying an old coin on its back. It survives by draining the life force from humans who try to pick up its coin. I picked up a lot of those coins in my playthrough. Is my life expectancy less now? Wo-Chien's Scarlet entry says, the grudge of a person punished for writing the king's evil deeds upon wooden tablets has clad itself in dead leaves to become a Pokemon. Wo-Chien exists because a scribe tried to record history and was punished by the king who didn't want that known. Qianpao's Scarlet entry says this Pokemon can control 100 tons of fallen snow. It plays around innocently by leaping in and out of avalanches it has caused. So, it's inconsiderate, but it's a ruin legendary. This is kind of their brand. Then its Violet entry says, the hatred of those perished by the sword long ago has clad itself in snow and become a Pokemon. So Wo-Chien's from a grudge, Qianpao's from hatred. What's next? Ting-Lu's Scarlet entry says, the fear poured into an ancient ritual vessel has clad itself in rocks and dirt to become a Pokemon. Then Chi-Yu's Violet entry says, the envy accumulated within curved beads that sparked multiple conflicts has clad itself in fire and become a Pokemon. A grudge, hatred, fear, and envy. Bundle of joy these Pokemon are. Roaring Moon's Violet entry says, according to an article in a dubious magazine, this Pokemon has some connection to a phenomenon that occurs in a certain region. This is talking about Mega Evolution. Roaring Moon has the same crescent wings as Mega Salamence. This is also further evidence that Mega Evolution reawakens a Pokemon's primal dormant genes from the past. Mega Aerodactyl's Ultra Moon entry says, Mega Evolution awakened some dormant genes, bringing back the sharp rocks that once covered Aerodactyl's entire body. Roaring Moon is proof that this is occurring not just for Aerodactyl, but multiple Mega Evolutions, maybe a bunch of different ones. Then finally, Iron Valiant's Scarlet entry says, it has some similarities to a mad scientist's invention covered in a paranormal magazine. This is one of the only future ones that I think makes sense. Like it being a robot built by a mad scientist, to me, that's logical here. I don't know at what point a robot turns into a Pokemon though. The future ones don't make as much sense as the past ones. Thanks so much for watching, with an extra special thanks to my patrons over on Patreon who are helping support my channel independent of fluctuating YouTube ad rates. If you want to help support me in the same way, the link is in the description below. And if you want to check out some more of my fun Pokemon content, I recommend these videos here. All right, that's all I have for now. So until next time, big fans, gotta catch them all.